Hello everyone! Today I will show and tell you about how I made this stained glass art installation and the forgotten women who inspired it. The first woman has, in the past decades, been brought out of relative oblivion back into the limelight where she rightfully belongs. It's Artemisia Gentileschi. I hope I pronounced her name right because it's a really difficult name. The second woman is my foremother Margriet Hemelaers. Nobody knows her. She was a Dutch peasant woman from the 17th century. I will show you my attempt at bringing Margriet back to life through stained glass painting. Margriet Hemelaers might not have been any more spectacular than most of us, but researching and telling about the lives of ordinary women from history teaches us about how we view womanhood today. As far as we know, there's no painting of my great etc. grandmother. She was just too poor to have her portrait made. As her living descendant, I decided that I will use my own face for this portrait. Back to Artemisia. This Italian artist lived from 1593 until 1653. Margriet has been estimated to live from circa 1600 until 1650, so they were women of the same generation. Artemisia was the daughter of artist Orazio, based in Rome. As far as I have discovered, many female artists in history came from a family of painters, because a middle-class woman or a poor woman rarely had the opportunity to learn how to paint when it was not already the family business. And as it turned out, she was a much better painter than her brothers. And in her own age, she rose to fame. Her style has been compared to that of Caravaggio because of the strong contrast between dark and light in their paintings. This style is also called chiaroscuro. One of the reasons that there is a lot of information about Gentileschi's life is because of a court case. Artemisia was raped by her teacher Agostino Tassi. Her father sued him not for the rape, but for dishonoring his daughter and not marrying her, because that's what you do after a rape, and stealing one of Artemisia's paintings. The rape and lawsuit must have been absolutely traumatic for her, because for her testimony she was tortured and subjected to inspection of her private parts. Horrific! Gentileschi painted many depictions of biblical women. In my opinion, she is not afraid to show the raw reality of these women's lives. You see their intelligence, their fear, and their brutal strength in her paintings. I hope that painting was a way for her to deal with the traumatic events of her life. I especially like her paintings of Judith, as I also made a stained glass painting of Judith for my glass exam. My painting is a copy of a stained glass window by the Grabet brothers. Although as a female artist, Gentileschi was mostly considered a side note by many male art historians through the ages, but she was pretty famous in her own time. She was admitted to the Accademia dell'Arte del Disegno and traveled to England to paint for Charles I. Eventually, Artemisia died in Naples, most probably from the plague. To show my love for the great Gentileschi, I decided that the portrait of Margriet would be a little wink to Artemisia's famous self-portrait, but with my face instead. I hope I don't screw up. As I am not as great an artist as Artemisia, I had to make a picture of myself in the same position as she did and use that to sketch my face in. For the rest of the body, I used her self-portrait as inspiration. In the original portrait, Artemisia is holding a paintbrush. She's working on a painting that starts at the edge of the frame. It's really a beautiful composition. I am pretty sure that Margriet couldn't paint. In the final work, you will see that she's not actually holding a paintbrush. I researched paintings and drawings of peasant women to look at their clothing. Margriet lived in the south of the Netherlands, in the province of Brabant. She lived in the small hamlet of Lierop. Due to the 80 Years' War, this was one of the poorest areas of the Netherlands at the time. Life in her village must mostly have looked like the paintings from Pieter Bruegel the Elder and his two sons, Pieter Bruegel the Younger and Jan Bruegel the Elder. They lived in nearby Belgian Brabant. The biggest difference between Dutch Brabant and Belgian Brabant is Dutch Brabant has less hills, it's more flat. As far as I could tell from Breugel's paintings, Margriet's clothing wouldn't have been too dissimilar to the clothing on the portrait of Artemisia, except for the kerchief around her neck. In my sketch, I leave out the necklace and the pretty details on her shirt. Both Margriet and Artemisia would probably have worn a headdress most of the time, but as Artemisia is not wearing one in her painting, Margriet won't be wearing one. When I have finished the sketch, I will enlarge it on my computer and make a printout in the size of my artwork. When painting stained glass, it is common to use a sketch called a carton under your glass. Making corrections is very time-consuming, difficult and even impossible once the paint has been in the kiln. The first layer of paint, the contour lines, I paint with the carton underneath. For the other layers, these lines are my reference and I want to be sure that they are in the right place. I have cut 4 pieces of glass. For this work I use mouth-blown glass by Lamberts because they just have amazing glass. I have used a clear glass with a very light pink hue. The sleeves are actually green, but it's not convenient for me to make them out of green glass as well. I do prefer to use different colors of glass for the different parts. It's also more common for that period. And it also makes the total work really intense. Unfortunately, sometimes due to a lack of time or funds, I decide to color the sleeves with paint, enamel paint. I only need to prepare a small amount of paint for the first layer of lines. In a later video, I will explain more about the different pigments and how to prepare paint. I have not made any separate studies of these hands and their positions. In hindsight, I think I should have done so. When I have made a small mistake in the beginning, it can have an effect on the structure of the whole hand. And once that mistake has been in the kiln, there is nothing I can do about it anymore. I have to work with it. I don't want to paint too many lines. I don't like it when I'm painting in this style, this technique. Just the minimum amount of lines that I need for the next layer, I will paint. For the next layer, the shadow layer, also called grisaille, I need a lot of paint. I pick up the paint with a wet flat brush and apply it as evenly as possible over the glass. I can play a bit with the direction of the paint and the brush strokes, thinking like where do I need the paint to be the thickest. When the paint is still wet, I use a dry badger brush to carefully even out the paint and create a layer that is more smooth with less visible brush strokes. Also here, I think about where I want to push the paint. I can also make deliberate strokes or other structures in the paint if I want more texture. I will explain more about that in a later video. I really like to do fabrics and folds. Although you have to make it look natural, you have some freedom to play around. This enormous sleeve is a real eye-catcher. There are some nice sharp edges that catch the light and folds that are very, very dark. I use different kinds of brushes that leave different structures in the layer of paint. For really small, sharp lines, I use a dip pen. For thicker lines, I use a small wooden skewer. When I'm painting a portrait, I have to think about the likeness. This is my own face, and because of the lack of models, I have painted it many times. I know my face pretty well, so I know how big and sharp my nose is, I know the shape of my lips, etc. When I paint a living person, I do wonder, I get a bit insecure. I wonder if they want me to make a flattering portrait of them. I don't want to embarrass them. But then again, I am the artist and I have a purpose for this portrait. And it doesn't always need to be a likeness. For this portrait, I have wondered if I needed her, Margriet, to look like me. I have made more portraits of myself that are far less flattering than this one. But apparently this is a good angle for me, so thank you, Artemisia. Margriet must not have had very delicate hands. She was a farmer. Like her husband, she would have been working the land and doing hard labor in all kinds of weather. The centuries in which most of my ancestors were farmers were a couple of degrees colder than now. Winters would have been freezing and there would be snow every year. Nowadays, those really cold days are more of an exception than a rule. After the first grisaille layer has been in the kiln, I thought it was still a bit too light in some spots, so I decided to add another layer. When I am painting this layer, I will tell you a little bit more about the search for Margriet Hemelaers. It was difficult to find any information on her, and I was still a novice in genealogy. Someone on a forum pointed me to a document that describes the division of her father's land after his death. It is mentioned there that Margriet has already died and had left 2 children. Her husband has remarried and has had more children with his new wife. This way I could estimate that Margriet was probably born around 1600 and had probably died around 1645-1650. There were several possible causes to her death. It could have been death from childbirth, maybe a violent death, or death from a disease. There was a plague epidemic in the region around that period, and as Artemisia had died around the same time from the plague, it might have been possible that both Artemisia and Margriet, around the same age, suffered the same fate. Margriet's father, Hendrik Hemelaers, was not a super poor farmer. He was a farmer with several small plots of land and a house, which were divided amongst his surviving daughter Marieke and Margriet's children. The past century had been very rough on the province of Brabant. The Dutch were in a war of independence with the Spanish King Philip II. A lot of it was fought out in Brabant. While in Holland the golden age of trade and colonialization was bringing wealth, war had brought poverty and hardship to Brabant. When I was satisfied with the second layer of paint, I proceeded to the last step, the colored layer, or enamel. This layer is traditionally painted on the back of the glass. The pigments in the paint I used here really change color when heated and reacting with the glass. What looks like a reddish opaque layer now comes out of the kiln as a pretty transparent green. At first I planned to put all the pieces together using the copper foil technique, also known as Tiffany. But in the end, I decided it would look better to frame the composition in a lead profile. I used lead that wasn't too stiff, so that you can easily bend it around. I slowly but surely molded it around the edges of my work, using pieces of wood and nails to temporarily secure it in place. You see, I am not wearing gloves. I should have. Lead is poisonous, but not super poisonous when you touch it, and wash your hands very thoroughly afterwards. I also don't use lead on a daily basis, often not even on a monthly basis. Next, I solder the crossings to fixate the lead. This takes a lot less solder than using the Tiffany technique. Soldering lead is much more poisonous, so I use a face mask with the correct filter, and I use a special electric filtering machine like a vacuum, and it sucks in the vapors. After soldering on both sides, I cement the space between the lead and the glass, This is a flexible kit, especially made for stained glass. It works as a glue, but it also keeps water out. When it's a window, I cement both sides, but as this is a work that will never hang outside, I only cement one side, because I'm lazy. The portrait is just a piece of a larger composition that has elements of all my research and discovery in it. I used second-hand objects that are similar to objects from the period Margriet lived in. I have linen with prints of the original document that I found, and dry wheat and barley, which was produce of the farm. But for me, I still needed to do something more. I wanted to write a story about Margriet using facts from history and my own imagination. So this is the story of Margriet Hemelaers. Margriet Hemelaers loved long summer nights outside with her family at home in Lierop. She hated waking up early and she didn't like living in a village. She wasn't sour about it, she just didn't feel she belonged there. Working the land, the endless cycle of seeing crops grow and taking care of the animals weren't any fun to her. Her mother said sternly that life wasn't about fun. Her mother always warned her not to stand out, not to show off, but to be a good girl. As she grew up, Margriet realized that life was often dangerous too. Soldiers and bandits sometimes raided the area around the village. People who traveled the roads were often attacked and robbed. Visiting another town meant a journey full of risk. Margriet and her husband Marcel had often been to the market in Helmond. They would sell butter and cheese. One day, on their way back, they had run into a group of men who had started to beat Marcel up. Margriet ran off, asking for help at a nearby farm, and when she and the farmer came back, the man had already run off with all of their earnings of the day. Fortunately, Marcel wasn't hurt too badly. But the village wasn't safe either. Troops of soldiers would pass by Lierop. The villagers would have to pay them off by giving them food and a part of their harvest. But whenever the soldiers weren't pleased with their bounty, they would raid and pillage the farms and houses. Margriet would hide with Janneke, her daughter, and little Hendrik, her son, until the soldiers had passed. Margriet couldn't help but feel that life was unfair. How could she be grateful and content with what she had? She hardly had anything. Was she supposed to accept all the hardships that had come to her and her family and just pray for salvation? They didn't even have a church anymore. It had been taken over by the Protestants. So, instead of simply accepting life's hardships, Margriet enjoyed simple acts of disobedience. Playing games with the children instead of washing and cleaning, drinking too much beer whenever there was a feast, and singing songs when she felt it was too quiet. This would get her mother Ida very upset, warning her that she could be punished for not behaving appropriately. However, there was one household task Margriet did enjoy: cooking and making butter. She was a star at making a great meal out of simple ingredients. Sometimes she would even make cheese when they had extra milk. Hardly anybody in Lierop made cheese, and hers tasted delicious. It sold really well. And on her favorite long summer nights, she would eat a bite of cheese and some cherries with her sister Marika. They would dream of a life outside of the village, maybe as a cook for the nobility, or as a traveling merchant, or anything else. Thank you for watching my video. Would you like to help my channel? You can by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications and everything. Thank you very, very much, and bye bye.